citizens, she didn't spare little child, she didn't spare her own family, she didn't think twice before wiping out pretty much 2 full families. So we will continue to keep getting you more on this. For now, let's move on to the second big conversation, because this is also a conversation that we constantly have here on Mirror Now, since it affects your life and affects my life, the state of our economy. As per the latest Nielson report on fast-moving consumer goods are products like soaps and shampoos and biscuits that come to the shop shelves and are quickly bought and rolled over. So they are fast-moving goods that you and I consume. India is witnessing a massive slowdown when it comes to sale of these goods, especially in rural India. According to the Nielsen report, between July and September period, rural India saw its worst sales in the last 7 years. Here are the key highlights of the Nielsen report before we actually get you the voice from Nielsen. Rural consumption is at a 7-year low. This is the first time in 7 years that the rural sales growth, the rural growth is actually lagging behind urban. Because in India, we've been seeing how in rural parts as well, people have been getting more money in their hands, people have been progressing in life and consuming more and spending more. For the first time in 7 years, that trend is now reversing. While the Nielsen report goes on to say rather, that a revival on cards is likely in 2020, that's next year. They are saying that there is pressure in the traditional trade because of lack of cash. There isn't enough liquidity, they don't have enough cash, which is also impacting the business and sales. That's essentially what the data suggests. Here are the big data points. July to September in 2018, if the growth registered for rural India was 20%, the same period, July to September, this time in 2019, the growth was only 5%. Times Network spoke with the Nielsen spokesperson on this to try and understand what's causing this slowdown in rural India, apart from in general consumption. Here is what he had to tell us.
So if you see, in last 9 months, we have seen unemployment rates really shot up there. We're also seeing the wages, and in the form of Manrega rural wages which comes in, the increase in those wages have been minimal in last 10 years. We are also seeing that around 12 to 13 states had a flooding situation. So yes, previous quarter we were talking about would the rainfall deficit happen or normal rainfall will happen. In last 2 months, the rainfall have been very good. But then 12 to 13 states have also seen some bit of flooding happening, which also means that the farm income is getting impacted. One of the zone in rural which I want to talk about is North Zone, which has the maximum share of rural. That has massively got impacted, and there are certain factors in North. If you see some of the parallel sectors like auto sector, ancillary sectors are in North. There also we have seen a lot of stress happening, which is also adding on to the unemployment and the stress on disposable income happening.
Times Network also spoke to Chief Economic Advisor of India, and he too admits that yes, there is a slowdown. Even though he went on to say that India's fundamentals are strong, he said that India will claw back growth levels that it deserves to be at. He also then went on to say that as far as the urban cooperative banks are concerned, there's a different set of issues, but they are seeing improvement in the process of lending. Remember, banking and bank lending has been a very, very different, big crisis that we've been looking at. But the Chief Economic Advisor believes that while in the short term, government can take steps to spur consumption, it's only investment and steps like cut in corporate tax that in the long term will help us revive the economy. At least there is an admission that there is a serious problem at hand. Let me go across to our panelists. Say good evening to Professor Arun Kumar, Chair Professor, Institute of Social Sciences, and of course, former Professor and Chairperson for Center for Economic Studies and Planning at JNU. Amnish Agarwal, Head of Research at Prabhudas Leeladhar. Professor Aman Agarwal, Director of Indian Institute of Finance, with us this evening as well. Amnish, let's begin with you. What Nielsen and this report tells us this evening has that also been visible in the way some of the companies have been performing? We would have seen numbers come out for the biggest of the consumer goods companies, from Hindustan Unilever to Marico and ITC. Are they pointing to similar trends that there is in rural parts of our country, people are not buying enough?
If you look at past few years, rural India has always been growing at a much higher pace than urban India. However, if you look at the recent quarters, for example, in the latest quarter for Hindustan Unilever, which is a bellwether in the Indian FMCG space, their growth rate in rural India has only been 50% of what has been the growth rate in urban India. So definitely there's a slowdown which is happening in rural India, but I would say that this quarter is not the only one. It has been happening from the past few quarters, which is a sum total of several factors which have been play, ranging from say your poor crop prices last year to bad monsoons, unremunerative milk prices, and also your credit availability which is there in the cash economy of the country.
So, Amnish, according to you, before I go to our other two panelists, what's causing this right now, the slowdown? Obviously, one fact is that rural India was seeing a bigger demand in the last few years, so maybe there is some kind of, tapering off there. But are there other reasons, like, Nielson was pointing out, the fact that many parts have been hit by flood, the fact that there is unemployment now that is very visible, so obviously people don't have money in their hands, and the fact that even on the trade side or the business side, people don't have money to sell more to run this business. Would you agree with some of these reasons?
You see, one has to look at, one has to slightly do a deep dive to understand what exactly drives the rural economy today. Unlike say 15-20 years back, when agriculture was the backbone of the rural economy, today the agriculture income is not more than say 25 to 30% of the total rural income. So for the rural economy to grow, it's not only agriculture but also some of the allied activities. For example, dairy farming is one, or you can say the employment which the rural people get working as say a mason or an artisan, or doing some other job in the nearby cities, which includes the construction activities. Okay, some of the other you can say allied, you can say small jobs which people do. So that actually forms a bigger share of the rural economy. And if you include something like, you can say the local shopkeepers, the trade and all, so I think it is a sum total of the entire ecosystem which has got impacted.
Okay, let me go across to Prof. Aman Agarwal. Aman Agarwal, we've had a series of conversations when it comes to economy and slowdown. We had a conversation yesterday about the hunger index and how India has fallen on that. And many of our economists on that panel also said that this is also because there is pain in a certain segment of our country where people don't have the money. They don't have money to buy food, which is also reflective there. Do you believe that, yes, there is a problem, but maybe we are closer to a turnaround now, that the worst is behind us?
You see, Tanvi, there are a few factors. First of all, the companies which you have listed, I was able to go through some of the financials of these companies. And to my interest, I found that about 10 to 30% of rise in their profitability has taken place. With HUL, the Indulekha activity which they've taken over, which is the hair business, as actually they're going to pump in about 2,000 crores. If you look at Bayani, they're going to pump in about 1,000 crores. If you look at Grofers, they're going to actually tag on 700 shop floor shops to actually Kirana shops to actually do their business. Plus, they're going to pump in about 1,000 crores, which is already on their way, which they're doing. So apart from this, the Nestle and even the ITC and all are actually doing that. ITC, in fact, is looking at wanting to grow 25% of their business coming from rural India only. Now, these are companies which are very bullish and they're doing activities which is going forth, and their profitability is up by 10 to 30% when the global economy is going down. Indian economy is not doing that great as it was expected to do of 8%, but still doing at 5%. So, and even these figures which have been projected of 5 and 8%, let us understand that the rural economy, which was not being serviced to a large time with some of these goods and services, was being serviced. So there was an immediate impetus of growth which was there. You cannot expect the growth rate. This is the growth rate. That means the amount of magnitude of increase which is there. It is not the absolute number. There is still a growth of 5% and 8% in both these rural as well as the urban zone for the FMCG goods. So there is still that positivity which is there. It is not going down. If it was going negative, that there was no growth and they were having falls in their profitabilities, because ultimately what matters for a company is the profits they are able to raise from the markets. It is not, they are not having losses. I have not seen, about 8-9 companies I have been through their financials. I have not seen any one of these large pharmaceutical and the FMCG group companies, whether in India or in other parts of the world also, when they look at their corporate balance sheets, consolidated balance sheets, they have not shown any losses. They are all showing positive growth, anywhere ranging between 10 to 30%. So I do not see a cause of worry there. Certainly, if they were looking at a robust growth, that is certainly down, where the whole world is in a gloomy scenario. 5 to 8% is a fairly comfortable growth in their sales.
Okay, yeah, the whole world is going through a slowdown, and so is India, but obviously it becomes a lot more concerning for us because we need to grow at a certain pace. Otherwise, it could create a larger problem for us. What you pointed out, Professor Agarwal, is interesting, but let's also keep in mind there are two aspects, and for our viewers to also understand. Profitability is about what the companies make as profit. Now, you can increase the price of your product, sell it at a higher price, and get some more money, and that improves your profitability. If you look at volumes, now volumes is what this Nielsen report talks about more. How many of these products are you selling? How many of these soap units did you sell? And that's where it's come down. So does it mean people are buying less because they cannot afford since it's become more expensive?
Let me correct.
Or does it mean that people are buying products which are more expensive now?
No, Tanvi, let me correct that again. It has not gone down. You see, please understand.
It's okay, the growth has slowed down.
Buying
Correct.
10 units of a soap.
Yes.
I am now buying 8 yeah, so that means if I was buying 10 units of a soap, this time I am buying 8 units
Correct.
of the soap. If I was buying 10 pieces of biscuits, I am buying 8 biscuits. That doesn't mean that I am not consuming biscuits or I am not buying biscuits. So it's not that it's gone down. It's the consumption level has gone. Consuming less of it. And there could be n number of factors which could be, you cannot keep consuming television every day. A house doesn't buy a television every day. There are a lot of other equipments like
television is a different thing, but this country definitely upgrades its mobile phone every second month.
Yeah.
Yes, but I take your point.
Correct.
Okay. Professor Kumar, would you want to come in at this point? There are multiple reasons. It may not necessarily mean people can't afford it anymore.
Yeah.
It could simply be that they have bought enough of it.
No, so Tanvi, this is a series of bad news for the economy that has been coming. Today it's Nielsen's. Yesterday it was petroleum consumption declining, especially of diesel and naphtha. Before that was the index of industrial production going into negative territory. Before that it was the core sector going into negative territory. Before that it was the credit to the commercial sector declining by 88%. So there's been a series of declining performance of the economy. Now, the Nielsen's sample survey is much smaller than the NSSO sample survey. The NSSO sample survey shows that there's an overall decline in consumption in rural areas and urban areas. That I think is a very significant thing, and that's what the Nobel Prize winner Abhijit Banerjee also pointed out 3 days back, that the consumption decline is very, very significant because this kind of consumption decline has not happened for a long time in the Indian economy. Now, there's also another significant thing that's come out in the Nielsen's report, and that is that the small sector is losing production much faster than the larger sector. So there's a demand shift from the small sector to the larger sector, and that's why the unemployment is increasing, and that's why the demand is falling. So in other words, what has happened is that the unorganized sector has got very badly affected by a series of steps that have been taken in the last 3 years, and that's why the employment in the unorganized sector, which is 94%. When that suffers in terms of income, then the demand falls. And bulk of the unorganized sector is in the rural areas. It's in agriculture, it's in non-agriculture in rural areas. That's where the unorganized sector is. So if the unorganized sector incomes are hurt, if the employment there is hurt, then obviously demand comes down in the economy. Now, when we look at 5% or 8% rate of growth of the economy, that's only measuring the organized sector growth. That doesn't measure the unorganized sector growth at all. The unorganized sector data comes once in 5 years. It'll come in 2020. In between, we are simply assuming that the unorganized sector is growing at the same rate as the organized sector, which is no more true after demonetization. And if you include the unorganized sector growth separately, then the rate of growth of the economy is close to 0% or negative at the moment. So economy is not just slowed down, but it's gone into a recession. And that is why the problems are mounting one after the other. And the government is been in denial. It's only now in the last 2 months that the government seems to admit that there are problems and it's taken steps. But most of these steps are for the organized sector. For instance, the corporate sector tax cut benefits only 1% of the total number of businesses in the country which are in the corporate
sector. So very quickly,
sector.
and we'll carry this conversation forward also, Professor Kumar. But if I had to ask you, simply, how long do you think before we see a turnaround begin? Or do you think worst is yet to come? What would your answer be?
At the moment, there's no turnaround because investment rate is down, consumption is declining. If 5% rate of growth was there, then consumption should be rising and investment rate should be rising. Neither of the two are rising. So there is really no turnaround, and the government is taking steps to boost the organized sector, not the unorganized sector. You need to pump in purchasing power into the unorganized sector at a rapid rate, and that's not happening. Unless that happens, the turnaround will not come.
Okay, we'll take this conversation forward for sure.
More purchasing power into rural areas, into agriculture.
Yes, as more and more indicators come, more and more trends emerge, we will continue with this conversation. The fact of the matter is, I think it's a given now that this year is gone, and we're not going to see, any kind of a turnaround, at least in the next 2 months. Maybe festival season brings about a little cheer. Those numbers will also come out only in a couple of months. Can next year bring about some relief, or are we looking at a scenario where we may slip further down into a recession? Let's not forget that apart from our own problems, where in our villages, in our rural India, in our cities, people are consuming less, people are spending less, people have concerns about jobs, unemployment continues to be a big issue. There is also a larger global factor. And there is a larger global slowdown that we are looking at. And so our exports are also, falling at this point of time. A larger business sentiment isn't looking very good. The next conversation will have to be about when will we see the turnaround. For now, it's a wrap on this conversation of economy. So I'm going to thank all of our panelists for joining us.